So as if we didn't have enough good stuff for Space Marines today, with boosted Oath of Moment and a whole bunch of datasheets getting better, it seems that Games Workshop have given them a brand new detachment, with perhaps one of the most disgustingly powerful mortal wound combos in the game right now. Let's talk about some of the craziness from the Librarius Conclave, where the Space Marine Battle Mages can guide their Stern Guards for one squad to drop a knight in a single turn. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, where it seems that the poster boys in power armor get not one but two content drops today, with yet another detachment to add to their big cluster of ones from the Codex, and this one with an interesting Psyker theme. As ever, this is part of Games Workshop's Grotmas Advent Calendar, one new detachment today for each faction in the game, all fully playable with core match play rules and points cost for the enhancements written on them and available in the app in January. Day 11 was for the Space Marines, yesterday we had the Grey Knights, and tomorrow we'll have the Chaos Space Marines it seems, so a bit of goodness for the Heretic Astartes. I'll keep track of them all in the full playlist for the series linked in the video description. Today's Space Marine rules come in the context of the massive balance data slate, with buffed Oath of Moment and all sorts of datasheets getting more powerful, even if there were a few nerfs sprinkled in as well. But it seems that the theme that they've gone down for the actual Space Marine detachment is an interesting one, deciding to base a detachment around the Librarians of the chapter, and basically represent a force that's led into battle by their battle mages. In the chapter, the Librarians often stand apart from their brothers. The Imperium certainly has a natural mistrust of warp users, even if they're rather necessary to be able to combat all the otherworldly threats that they face. And in times of great need, if the chapter's Librarians seem like the best way to deal with a threat, they might be able to assemble a specific task force, perhaps aiming to get them to where they need to be to shut down the manifestations of demons, or limit the power of some sort of enormous tyrannid psychic beast, or trickery of the Eldar. As themes go, I wouldn't say it's exactly the biggest theme within the Codex Space Marines. I guess you could have equally dedicated a detachment to the chapter's chaplains. And recently in 40k, Librarian Datasheets have been a little bit on the niche side, not really seeing too much play in competitive. So for a detachment to revolve around them, you would need some quite serious incentives to run them, though it does seem that the detachment has delivered that to my mind. The rules that they've done do feel like they've got a fun feel to them, a bunch of buffs that the Librarians grant their led squads, and significant enough ones that you'd want to bother taking them. And then they've got a whole bunch of spells realised by various different stratagems, and then as we'll see, some rather devastating enhancements, including one of the silliest mortal wound combos in the game. In any case though, getting into it, the core rule is Psychic Disciplines. Each turn at the start of the battle round, all your psychic units gain a boost, choosing one of the 5 psychic disciplines on this list, named after the old core disciplines, I believe from like the 7th edition book. There's Biomancy, Divination, Pyromancy, Telekinesis, and Telepathy. You choose them at the start of the battle round, so not the start of the turn, so the opponent will be able to see what's coming at least a little bit, though I guess it does mean that the defensive one could trigger round 1. Those disciplines also amp up one certain stratagem and one enhancement each, but their primary buff is they give you an added rule to each of your units that's got the Psyker keyword, so normally the ones that are led by a Librarian. Though I guess Inquisitors and things could attach to battle line units, maybe giving you a few more options, including the option of Psychic on heavy intercessors, which otherwise you couldn't attach a Librarian to. In any case, for the choice of buffs, you have to choose just one of these, and then all of your units get the same buff. The first one is Biomancy for +2 to movement, then we've got Divination for reroll hit rolls of 1 and wound rolls of 1, that's in both range and melee. Then there's Pyromancy for improving AP of weapons by 1 within 12 inches. That seems strong for certain low to middling AP weapons. Could be fairly scary on, say, new style Infernus Marines, making them go to AP2 flamethrowers. Then Telekinesis, which reduces the strength of ranged attacks against the units. And finally Telepathy, which allows you to ignore hit roll modifiers or weapon skill or ballistic skill modifiers, maybe a little bit more niche depending on opponents. I feel like literally all of those could be useful and could potentially be the right choice depending on the exact opponent that you're fighting and what the board state is, though maybe most of them don't really feel quite strong enough to actually want to build around. I feel like the one that maybe breaks the mold for that a little bit would be the reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of 1. That's really quite a considerable damage boost if you didn't have any rerolls previously. That would essentially be a plus 36% damage increase, which is quite a lot, and very nice for the Librarian to basically grant to a unit all game if you wanted to, particularly when he does his other things such as the 4+ invulnerable save. Otherwise the close range shooting one could be handy to a whole bunch of units out there, and maybe some of the rest could be particularly good first turn if you're not able to get to grips with many targets. extra movement as you push up the board, or -1 strength to enemy ranged weapons if you think that you're going to have to move forward and then take fire afterwards. Certainly seems interesting and strong enough to build around though. Just making each unit that's got a librarian in it directly stronger and by a good margin, I think was a really good way to go with this one. Just for a quick reminder of the options available, we've got the standard librarian for 65 points. He gives a 4+ invulnerable save for his units and can attach to the vast majority of Tacticus things. Could be quite nice with intercessors, stern guard, or hellblasters maybe, and is often seen run with inner circle companions for the Dark Angels. Otherwise, we've got the Phobos Librarian. He's 70 points and gives sort of lone operative style protection, often used with infiltrators. It feels like he tends to get more used as a utility unit though. And I feel like the detachment buffs don't really help out his role quite as much as some of them perhaps. I guess there's a reactive movement enhancement that could be handy for him. Next up we've got the Terminator Librarian. He's 75 points and gives sustained hits 1 to his Terminator squad, so both better damage and range and melee. And that stacks seriously nicely with the reroll 1s to hit and wound where the two buffs overlap. Basically if he's leading a Terminator squad, even with no other buffs or any other synergy with the reroll 1s to hit and wound, that should essentially be a plus 70% damage increase. With a stack of reroll 1s to hit and wound and sustained hits 1 on top of that, really quite massive for a support character. Finally from the core codex we also have Chief Librarian Tigerius, who for 75 points I think is really quite an efficient datasheet, but is maybe just lacking a bit of impetus to run him. I feel like in Ultramarines he'd be basically auto-include though. He gets very good psychic shooting in his own right that would certainly enjoy the rerolls, plus defense against mortal wounds and psyche attacks, 0 CP Overwatch, and -1 to hit for his unit as well, and some alright melee compared with the rest. Getting yet another stats buff on top of all that just takes him through the roof. Before we get into some juicy stratagems, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Rattle Studios. They're a commission painting service based in the USA if you want some fancy models painted, both accepting commissions for individual 40k miniatures and squads or armies, with a small studio of painters run by Morgan Card, an X Games Workshop employee. Basically their offering is that you can contact them for a quote on a project and they'll work with you to deliver you what you want, and I did quite enjoy looking through their back catalogue. Always cool to see these stunning paint jobs on offer from these commission studios. As well as fully painted armies like these guys, they also offer things like detail ready ones where they do all the base colours and then you can finish off the minis yourself, and various tiers of basing surfaces. I thought that Imperial Fist army was genuinely quite impressive. There's some pretty cool object source lighting on this Forge World Riptide here. I really like the blending that they've done with the armour on this Sagittor. Definitely loads of cool stuff on display. In any case, feel free to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description. I'll cycle back to talk very briefly about their rates at the end of the video. Let's get into the Librarius Stratagems though. As ever, they do have Armour of Contempt on offer here. As mentioned, it has been nerfed against multiple attacks. It only works against the one unit post data slate, though it's still very good for debuffing melee attacks in particular. Beyond that though, I did quite enjoy that all the different stratagems are basically different forms of spells cast by the Psykers basically. Maybe giving it just a little bit of Space Marines but Thousand Suns sort of feel. Most of them feel like spells that are cast at 18-inch range from the Psyker models themselves. Kind of funny to think though that if you have Rabute Gilliman around, you'd be able to get extra spells. I guess his tactics can just motivate the Librarians to think extra hard. In any case though, for one command point, our first one is Sensory Assault. This one's quite a nice movement debuff one. You get to choose this in either command phase. In general though, I think it would usually make most sense to do it in your opponent's command phase. You get to select an enemy unit that's 18 inches and visible from the enemy Psyker, and they get -2 to move and -2 to charge rolls. On top of that, if Telepathy is active, which is the Ignores Modifiers one, you also have a Battle Shock test at -1 to the test, which could be kind of handy to deny some points on a midfield objective, but at the same time you would have had to select Ignores Modifiers, and I think you'd only want to do that against certain opponents that go really heavy on them compared with the other bonuses. In general, it's going to be a movement debuff stratagem, and in the right circumstances a -4 inches to a unit's charge threat range could easily be worth it. Say something like some Death Shroud Terminators slogging up the board, or a slow but fighty Dreadnought or similar. If you've say got an enemy unit that moves 6 inches, and they're not going to do much unless they make melee, if you're just over 12 inches away from them, that means that they need to have a charge roll of 10, which is really quite unlikely. It's kind of powerful that you can use this on things like monsters, vehicles and Titanic units as well. So I feel like if you're going to stop them getting into close combat with your own unit, you probably have to be fairly far back and towards the sort of 18-inch sort of mark. Certain units would absolutely hate this though. Next up, for one command point, we've got Iron Arm. This one's +1 strength in melee for one infantry unit of yours that's in the fight phase within 18 inches of a Psyker. and you get a +2 to the strength instead if Biomancy, the +2-inch move one, is active. I guess that feels like it has a bit of synergy, as that could give you a bit more stretch to get towards combat, and then potentially double down when you're there with a big damage boost. For just about any already efficient Space Marine melee unit, this one seems easy enough to trigger, and if it does make the difference between a +1 to wound and not, it could well be worth it. It's going to depend on your unit, the target, and whether or not you think you have enough damage output to easily kill them anyway. Definitely seems like a solid enough one though. Next up, for 1 command point, we've got a damage dealer in a sail. This one feels like long-range psychic grenade pretty much. You have a psycho model that's eligible to shoot. You roll 6d6, and for each 4+, you deal 1 mortal wound to an enemy unit that's within 18 inches. It can't be a lone operative that you wouldn't be able to shoot anyway. The psycho's got to be able to shoot, so you can't have advanced or fallen back normally. And does it mean that your unit wouldn't have been able to have shot already this phase? You'd have to use this first. Finally, you get a +1 to those rolls if telekinesis is active, which is the -1 strength versus range one. So I guess just a little bit of boosted value there, averaging 4 mortal wounds rather than 3. In general, that seems handy enough extra damage to throw out when needed. Could be nice versus big things with high saves, such as enemy Terminators or Land Raiders or whatever. Maybe a little bit of overlap with Grenade, which a lot of Space Marines can use anyway. If you're within 8 inches of your targets, it might not make too much difference. I guess in theory you could double down for 2 command points and something like 6 to 7 mortal wounds dealt, but that maybe does feel a bit spendy and situational. I guess maybe it could allow a Phobos Librarian unit to flex into some serious damage if they suddenly needed it for some reason. And it's often just good to be able to focus just a little bit more damage on one place where it's most needed around the map. Next up, for 1 command point, we've got Fiery Shield. 1 infantry or mounted unit becomes -1 to hit in the fight phase, and also their weapons gain hazardous if Pyromancy is active, so that would be the extra AP at range 1. For a durability boost, it's okay, maybe not crazily standout, and it will be competing with Armour of Contempt, which I think will often be the better one to go for in the fight phase. Maybe it could be good if you're going to be saving on your invulnerable save either way though, for something like Blade Guard. And I guess the hazardous is a bonus if you could happen to trigger it anyway, though it's only going to kill 1 in 6 enemy models at best. Maybe a bit more if they had extra attacks. I wouldn't really go focusing on the hazardous bit as the most important bit. Finally, for 1 command point, there's Prescient Precision, and this one's a shooting buff for the Psyker's own unit. Unfortunately, they can't go putting it on other things like the other spells. Basically, the Psyker's squad gets lethal hits when shooting, and the squad also gains Ignore Cover as well if Divination's active, which is the reroll 1s to hit and wound one. This one seems like quite an easy one to use depending on the targets. A nice easy damage buff that's often going to have both parts relevant on top of another nice easy damage buff of the reroll 1s to hit and wound. I guess in theory if you've even got a Terminator squad that you happen to be using it on for some reason, you'd also have sustained hits on top of that. As it goes, I feel like this one's really quite a nice flexible damage boost. Seems really good for most of the shooting units that you could lead. I feel like perhaps Hellblasters seem like one of the most obvious choices. They really enjoy lethal hits, and you can't have a lieutenant join them if they're led by a librarian. So getting that potentially ignores cover and reroll 1s to hit and wound is going to give you a seriously shooty squad, particularly when you could be using Oath of Moment just somewhere completely elsewhere. With their new double shoot rules, even standard intercessors seem kind of good for it though, or maybe heavy intercessors with those big damage 2 bolt rifles with an Inquisitor attached. Again, just seems like some really nice stacking buffs. Lethal hits, big rerolls and ignores cover are seriously good to amp up any firepower. Finally, for the detachment, we get for the enhancements, and as mentioned we've left the truly crazy stuff till the end. First up we've got Prescience, which is 25 points. This one's a reactive move which is always useful to have. Move d6 inches when the enemy ends a move within 9, and if you have been using the reroll 1s to hit and wound you get to move a full 6. If that is going to be the game plan, then that makes it into a seriously good enhancement, being able to pop your unit out, shoot some stuff, and then either run away from charges or hide behind ruins as the opponent moves up is just really nice. Maybe even hiding inside a transport like a repulsor perhaps. Next up we've got Celerity, which is 30 points. That one gives the Psyker's unit advance and charge, and if Biomancy is active then you get to declare a charge in a turn in which you fell back. I guess in theory with plus 2 inches to your move, plus advance and charge, you could deliver some infantry melee to close combat really quickly. That one does cost a lot of points though, so I feel like you're paying a premium for that privilege. Next up we've got Obfuscation, which is 20 points. Quite a powerful unable to overwatch this unit, which is good in some matchups. And then if Telepathy happens to be active, which is the Ignores Modifiers one, you can't be shot outside of 18 inches. And that's interesting too, to have that kind of debuff on potentially a big scary unit. You could be putting that on Terminators or Hellblasters, or a big unit of 10 Stern Guard or something like that. Ignores Overwatch is really powerful. though I feel like having to commit to it pre-game maybe makes it a little bit less good. For the most part, Space Marine stat lines are at least fairly resilient to Overwatch. I guess they'd be worried about things like Great Big Land Raider Redeemers or maybe Rubric Marine Warp Flamers for the Thousand Suns. I guess it could be handy enough to have around for the 20 points if you've got an enhancement going spare just to counter those matchups, but I feel like it's not going to be reliably useful every game. I guess maybe you could also use it for some big plays turn 1 against shooting armies, allowing something like a big scary damage dealer unit of yours to stand in the open and not be shot by enemies that are greater than 18 inches away. Feels like it could be handy enough with getting your things up the board safely. As mentioned at the start of the video though, there's one enhancement that seems to break the mold. It happens to be the last one on Games Workshop's list, and that one's called Fusillade for a nice cheap 15 points. This one gives the weapons in the bearer's unit anti-monster 5+, and anti-vehicle 5+. That's ranged weapons, including their own smite and everything. And then if Pyromancy is active, then you get sustained hits 1 as well to double down on the shooting. And if Telekinesis happens to be active, you get +6 inches to the range characteristics of your weapons. It seems like one of the things that consistently breaks 10th edition more than just about any other rule is Devastating Wounds and the anti-characteristic, particularly when you're allowed to do full wound rerolls. I feel like this one might not have been quite so notable if Games Workshop hadn't just rewritten the Sternguard datasheets today. But basically now Space Marine Sternguard are able to reroll all hit rolls and wound rerolls when they're targeting the thing that has Oath of Moment, and that means that their bolt rifles will be triggering devastating wounds on monsters and vehicles on a 5+. That means that even just going with the absolute base bolt rifles and not upgrading to heavy bolters or anything like that, a 10-man Sternguard squad spits out 30 attacks where you get around about 26 or 27 hits. And then if you reroll everything that isn't a 5 or 6, then you basically get around about 15 or 16 mortal wounds into a monster or vehicle. So basically a squad with bolters insta-killing something like a Land Raider. That's not even maxing it out or anything like that, as it also gets the boosted mortal wound count from the Sternguard heavy bolters, plus the Librarian's own devastating wound smite profile. So in reality it's even worse than that, never mind what they do to infantry where the actual strength 4 and AP 1 of their guns will still take effect as well. Overall I'd rate that as a bit problematic to say the least, and also probably so much so that it's likely going to have Games Workshop take issue with it in the near term. I certainly expect a balance patch for this in the next data slate at the very latest. It could well be that they drop some sort of emergency thing in their sort of bug fixing thing that they often do a couple of weeks after a data slate. In any case though, I feel like when given a difficult theme, this detachment actually does surprisingly well to make Librarians and their lead units genuinely quite scary. Just for their core things, as mentioned, the reroll 1s to hit and wound just seems pretty great. Really nice on just about any damage dealer, things like Terminators, Hellblasters or Intercessors, for just general purpose extra damage that's not dependent on Oath of Moment. At the moment I feel like that anti-vehicle 5+ keyword Fusillade Sternguard one is basically auto-include in this one, so you can basically just drop a big Sternguard squad and pretty much kill most things in the game with mortal wounds. If you absolutely maxed out the combo, rolled all the dice for Smite and the heavy bolters, and also turned on Pyromancy for a turn for the sustained hits 1. That gives you something in the region of like 25 mortal wounds, so a chance to one-shot a knight. You could have the combo delivered either out of a Repulsor maybe, or potentially dropping in via Uriel Ventris, or even sacrificing a Sternguard to put them in a drop pod. Otherwise though, the reactive move enhancement's quite nice. The Ignores Overwatch one definitely feels like it has potential, and I feel like basically all of the stratagems are usable. My first instincts will be to have Librarians leading things like bigger squads of Sternguard and Hellblasters, maybe getting there in Repulsors potentially. Though I do feel like there's a bunch of other ways that you could go. That'd give you some squads with 4+ invulnerable saves and a whole ton of damage. Perhaps having a Terminator Assault squad with a Terminator Librarian to put the smack down against some heavier targets. The stratagems do seem really quite good on those sort of units, flexing into lethal hits on Hellblasters, +1 strength on any melee where it could make a difference, movement debuffs and extra mortal wounds, and feels like some chapters could make some particularly good use out of it. In Ultramarines you could have Ventris to deliver that Sternguard strike, plus maybe Chief Librarian Tigurius, who's just all-round efficient with one of these scary squads. I feel like Deathwatch Terminators also seem like they're particularly well suited to this. They love that average 70% damage increase from the Terminator Librarian with the reroll 1s. That's going to go down very nicely both on all of their Cyclone missile launcher shots if they want them, and also any melee that they follow up with of course. As mentioned, I'd expect the dumb mortal wound combo to get patched, but beyond that I still think that the detachment will be an interesting and fun one. Let me know if you'd be tempted to put some Space Marine Psychers on the table in this one, and if so, how would you go about doing so? It just seems like there's a whole bunch of ways that you could potentially use the rules, maybe using Dark Angel's Inner Circle companions with Librarians, and delivering them with Biomancy could be another cool option. In any case, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. Feel free to check out my Grotmas playlist, linked down in the video description. That's where I've got all the past detachment reviews, and I'll keep the future ones going forward. And finally, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in Rattle Studios. If you want to have some cool miniatures painted for you by Morgan Card and his team of painters who are based in Kentucky and the USA, here are their rates. Smaller infantry are usually $15 fully painted, with a little extra for basing and for trickier colours like yellow or white. Medium-sized characters painted up as a centerpiece are $50 fully painted. Medium vehicles like Predator tanks and things are around about $125, and then really big vehicles are more like $200 or so. I feel like there's kind of economies of scale with this one, being one enormous miniature. Can be painted a bit more efficiently than loads and loads of tiny ones. In any case though, if you want some cool painted stuff looking somewhat like this, then feel free to check them out linked in the video description. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Let me know your thoughts as to the Space Marine Librarius stuff down in the comments. I'll hopefully be back in the not too distant future to talk some more balanced data slate things. Lots of things to unpack with the really big rules drop. Feel free to check out the channel's Patreon page and the discount affiliate links for Warhammer stores down in the video description. All of that good stuff helps support the channel. But otherwise, an absolutely enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.